Good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to SBAM Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Communications at SBAM, and I am joined today by my frequent co-host of late, Kelli Saunders. Kelli, welcome back to the show.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Kelli Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement at SBAM. Happy to be with you and update you on the news of the day. Sarah, I think we will start out like we always do in welcoming a new member. I will give it back to you.
Yes, we will. We are welcoming another new elite member, Qualigence International. They work to redefine recruiting by putting people first and focusing on long-term success. So welcome to Qualigence International and team. All right, so Kelli, it was a very eventful week last week in the legislature. And so we've invited, well, you're here today, but we've also invited our colleague Jacob Manning to join us. So I'm going to let you two take it from here so you can fill us in on all of what transpired and didn't transpire last week.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Jacob and I spent many nights at the Capitol, over at the Capitol, and then around the Capitol, talking to our friends that work in that beautiful building of ours. But Jacob, go ahead and reintroduce yourself to our viewership. Remind them what you do here at SBAM.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacob Manning, and I'm the Grassroots Coordinator and Policy Advisor here at SBAM. Of course, part of the advocacy team, working alongside Kelli as we take the issues that are most important to our members and communicate those views to our friends over in the legislature. So, Kelli, as you mentioned, we spent a lot of time in Lansing over at the Capitol this week. I think it would be best if we started out this segment. Could you describe the overall feel from last week? There was a lot going on between the chambers with the governor, the Democrats, the Republicans. This will just kind of help set the stage. So, what was the temperature like in Lansing last week?
Much like the weather, frosty. That's where I'll leave that. It was an interesting time to be in Lansing, and we obviously there's a clock that comes down to this lame duck session. And so there are varying priorities that were happening over in the House and in the Senate and the governor's office. What popped, I'll say, of late was this idea of a roads deal that was to be essentially debated and negotiated between all three chambers. But with that came some negotiation amongst other priorities that the Senate and the House had. Governor was really intent on getting a roads deal passed, which was a little bit of a pivot from what we had talked about earlier, where we thought economic development would really be a focus for her and that main linchpin, but it ended up being a roads plan. Not to say that she let go of an economic development plan, still wanted money for SOAR, for hire, which we've talked about before. And of course, we really wanted to see R&D get over the finish line for our members to have access to those types of dollars. So certain things that were the Senate was looking for that we will talk about as we move forward was, gutting of the workers' compensation system, things like family medical leave, a 15-week intermittent program that we've talked about before, some data privacy, data breach bills, Consumer Protection Act, a lot of things that would impact our members that was coming from the Senate. And then on the House side, I will say that there's just a lot of disagreement amongst not only the Democratic caucus, which we've talked about after losing the election, was a little bit fractured, and there were just numerous priorities from all the different members that they were seeking to get through that chamber. But then also the Republicans really coming to the table. And I think we're really interested in a roads deal, but had really started to push the narrative on fixing the phase out of the tip credit and also the Earned Sick Time Act. And so when all of those things were colliding at once with this ticking time clock that we have of the year coming to an end, essentially, I'll say the wheels fell off the bus last week. And it was a pretty um, controversial, pretty contentious time between all the different parties and within the separate parties in order to get things off the finish line. And so what we saw was a lot of legislation move out of the Senate to be passed over to the House. And the House kind of stalled out on Friday. And so what will this week hold? there's still time to pass some of this stuff that will be pretty harmful to us, but we'll dive into that for the rest of this program. So I'll call it a frigid affair last week. But let's dive into some of the things that affect our members the most. Jacob, at the front end of the week, which seemed to pass with ease, much to our detriment, was expansion of unemployment weeks and benefits. So why don't you go over that piece with us on how that went down, and we can talk a little bit about the details of what that means for the future.
Yeah, we had been bracing for some discussion on expansion of unemployment benefits just over the last couple of months. If you remember, I believe it was it was around the budget time actually when an expansion of benefit weeks. Right now, the current maximum benefit weeks that somebody can be on unemployment insurance is 20 weeks. And this bill passed the House around budget time last year that would increase that to 26 weeks, which is actually the federal maximum number of weeks somebody can be on unemployment insurance benefits. So that was problematic enough as it was, but as we crept closer to the end of this legislative year, we began hearing rumblings that there was also an appetite to increase the maximum benefit amount. The current benefit amount, maximum benefit amount in Michigan is $362 a week. And at the time, we were hearing that there was a desire to get that as high as the low 600s. As we started going through this committee process post-election, we heard the chair of the Labor Committee say that there was going to be a benefit amount included in this bill, Senate Bill 40, which was being thrown around in conversations. We weren't we didn't see what the benefit amount increase was going to be until essentially it was up in the Senate for a vote. We actually issued our first call to action on this. It was December 4th, and this was right before it was about to come up for a vote in the Senate, hopeful that we could get some people to stop it. The weekly benefit amount increase that they had proposed was $614 a week, which is almost a 70% increase from where we're at now. Quite drastic. So in the Senate, we issued that original call to action December 4th. The bill passed in the Senate. It's been very hard for us to get things to stop in the Senate. All 20 Democrats in the Senate voted yes on it, and then one UP Republican voted yes on it as well. It had to wait 5 days, as is the rule in the legislature, before coming up for a vote in the House. December 9th is when we issued a call to action for all of our House members, urging them to vote no on this increase in benefits in weeks. And on Tuesday of last week, it went up in the House. And as you said, it seemed quite easy. All 56 Democrats and the 2 Republicans as well switched over and voted yes on that. And so there will be a series of increases to the unemployment benefit maximum amount. So Kelli, if you wanted to provide a little bit more color to this, what does the future hold in this space?
Yeah, this is obviously very unfortunate because it is a tax on employers. And so what we will see over the years is that, unfortunately, this will impact the small business community with raising rates. And so the dollar figures were January 1, 2025, that the benefit will not exceed $446. On January 1 of 2026, it will not exceed $530, but then on January 1st of 2027, we'll hit that 614 mark. So it is essentially like a 2-year phase in, but a 3-year phase in. And the dependent amounts will also go up. And so with those rates going up, that obviously is a rate increase on employers. And so while we're very disappointed in this, specifically when talent is at a shortage, and we know that you all know this as you seek to hire talent, there are over 200,000 open jobs in Michigan. Setting this kind of precedent in raising weeks and benefit amounts does not incentivize people to get back to work. We do obviously understand that the UI system needs to be there for people who do not have work of no fault of their own. We have always said that, but also we've been really intent on working with the UIA director, who will be actually departing after the first of the year, on making sure that the system is fixed due to all the issues that it encountered during COVID. And so while that system is essentially going through an overhaul, and a new system is going to be implemented in the coming year, we wanted the director to be able to do her work and show that it is a fraud-free system that has guardrails on it, that really does make sure that it is a good steward of the employer's money that they put into it. Additionally, the UIA trust fund has not been built back up since the COVID-19 pandemic. It's about 2 billion short of what it should be compared to what it was prior to the pandemic. And so the legislature making this move to essentially increase all of these different, variables with UIA before all these things are done in the form of restoring the trust fund and making sure the system is functional is really quite irresponsible. So we are very disappointed to see those who voted for it, but we will make sure to keep you updated on those increases as they come. And we'll continue to work with the department to make sure that fraud is snuffed out within the system. So thank you to all of you who responded to the call to action. It definitely was felt in the system, but this was a priority number one for the House and the Senate to get across the finish line. That bill has been presented to the governor. We do expect that she will sign it. And so we will keep an eye out for if and when she does. But please do know that that is coming. And this is pretty much an absolute for us as we head into 2025. So Jacob, another call to action that we did issue about midweek was what I mentioned earlier in the system about a family medical leave program that was advancing throughout the Senate. And this is also known as MyFlock, which we have flagged on our website for what seems well over a year now, a 15-week program. There were some amendments to the bill, and we want to recognize that. But why don't you go over what that program was and why we were not supportive of it in its current form?
Yeah, people who have been keeping a close eye and staying updated with the work that we've been doing in advocacy will be well aware of this program. We, as you mentioned, have been talking about this for well over a year now. If you can remember back to August 2023, Governor Whitmer had a press conference and gave a what's next address where she named family medical leave, or excuse me, a paid family leave program as one of her top priorities for 2023. That proposal, which is the MyFlock program that we've been talking about for so long, lost momentum and lost steam as we kind of worked throughout the legislature and told them about all the harms that this program would bring to small businesses. And essentially what this program was in its introduction stage is a 15-week intermittent use paid family leave program. It can be used not only for maternal and paternal leave situations, as you'd expect with a paid family leave program, but also for reasons like leaving work to attend a meeting at your child's school, and it can be used intermittently, so it can be used sort of as a leave bank. And so there were a lot of problems that we had with it. The administration of it was going to be very cumbersome. It was going to be a hugely expensive program. The nonpartisan Senate Fiscal Agency predicted that a program of this magnitude would cost anywhere between $16 and $17 billion a year to administer. And on its face, it would really take key HR decisions out of the hands of small business owners and put them into like a UIA style bureaucracy for the government to handle. And so we had thought that this thing was staved off, but as often happens with lame duck, this is a final push for legislators to get their most important issues to them across the finish line. And so we saw this come back to life as well. Got a hearing in committee, and it passed committee and discharged to the Senate floor. Once it's on the Senate floor, we were concerned that the Senate would take it up and would pass it and send it to the House. But luckily, they did not. We sent out a call to action on this one midweek, as Kelli had mentioned, and there just wasn't enough support in the Senate for it to move forward. And there was an amendment in the Senate at the time before it passed committee to change it from 15 weeks to 12 weeks of intermittent family leave. Still not close to a place where we could support it, obviously opposing all the way through. But at this point, it does appear that this one has lost some steam. Kelli, do you want to add some comments to this one as well?
Yeah, we just want to say a big thank you to all of you. That call to action was very impactful. The whole idea of what we just talked about, right, with UIA, of creating another system that clearly is not at this time particularly well run. And so setting up another multi-billion-dollar system that you would have to pay into, the fact that maybe employees don't even understand that they will be paying into it too. We've watched a state, Minnesota, try to implement a system like this, and now they are clawing it back because it is not successful in the way that it needs to be built up within the government in Minnesota, and then also the resistance from employers to buy into this program. And so we've also, beyond, sharing those kinds of thoughts about how we have opposition to this, it's government getting in the way of the in between the relationship with the employer and the employee, which we as a policy stance stand against. But also putting this on top of the Earned Sick Time Act, which we have talked about in exhaustion, and how that would couple with this was an absolute nightmare waiting to happen. And so while we'll talk about the Earned Sick Time Act a little bit later or on Wednesday, which we'll talk about in a little bit, this was just one of those policies that was not to seriously be taken up during a time when we are trying to juggle all of these other things. And so we obviously have a lot of compassion for people who have issues like this, but there are other ways to address it than a policy that was going to be so overarching and imposing on the small business community. And so we just want to say thank you. The Senate heard you in this instance. It took a lot of convincing, but also when you laid out the business case on how expensive this was going to be, like Jacob said, 16 to 17 billion dollars in order to make this happen. Your voice was heard very much on this one. We're going to pivot to another call to action that we also sent out last week, which was surrounding workers' compensation and a gutting of the system. And so, Jacob, let's give an overview of that legislation, and then I'll dive into a little bit of the dynamics of what happened there.
Yeah, this was another one of these issues that we've been tracking for a long time. I know earlier this year you had Wendy Block with the Michigan Chamber of Commerce on this program to discuss some of the intricacies about what had been discussed at the time. Now, at that time, a bill hadn't been introduced, but since then, we do have bill language, and the language that we had and were able to analyze is a lot more harmful than we could have even anticipated. So this was Senate Bill 1079 and 1080. A lot of the advocates pushing this bill said that they were trying to just bring the system back to where it was pre 2011, which is when a lot of reforms were made to that system. Since then, premiums for workers' compensation have gone down drastically. And we think that a rollback to that period is actually not a good thing because it would increase premiums on employers. Um, but this bill actually goes further than that. This bill would completely broaden the definition of what is a disability. It would eliminate the distinction between disabilities. So somebody who was minorly injured and still capable of certain work would still would have access to the full funds of a wholly disabled person. This bill would eliminate a lot of the work search requirements and a lot of the wage earning offsets. And what was interesting about this bill too is that it included a provision that would backdate all of these legislative changes back to all the way to 1985. So based on our analysis of these bills, we thought that this would drastically increase costs for employers. We thought that this would raise premiums anywhere in the 20 to 40% range on employers. And again, as Kelly mentioned, when we have all of these other things that keep piling, stacking on top of each other, this just seemed like it wasn't necessarily a great direction for the state to go in, especially when our workers' compensation system is a national model and is doing fine for employers and employees. And so, Kelly, as you mentioned, there was a lot of discussion around this bill. I know we had kind of been concerned that this was a bill that had so many intricacies and so much depth of knowledge required that people could easily be misled into supporting this bill just, you know, being misled and could potentially cause some major harm. There was a lot of drama surrounding this bill package. Could you tell us about what ended up happening here?
This one was a challenge. This was an all-nighter. I'll say that one on this specific bill. There were definitely vehicles in both chambers, in the Senate and the House, the Senate being the main driver of this legislation. There was a way to advance similar legislation, if not mirrored, over in the House. And so there was a back and forth between what could actually be run in what chamber. And it took a lot of our organization, our fellow business organizations, and our partners, I'll say at Blue Cross Blue Shield, in order to really tell the truth behind what an impact that this would have on employers. Like you said, Jacob, potentially a 40% increase on premiums. Our workers' compensation program went through reform in 2011. It is a national model. Before it was reformed in 2011, which this would take it back and then some, was bottom 10 in the entire country. And so this idea of a leap to best practice in 2011 and then taking us all the way back, this isn't it makes our state uncompetitive with the legislation that was proposed and put on the table. Because it is so complicated for legislators to fully understand the impact that this specific legislation would have had with all the intricacies of, like you said, no work search requirements, the definition of a disability, this retroactiveness back to 1985. It just was really installing those points of making sure that legislators understood the gravity of what they would be doing, and then this back and forth between the House and the Senate. At the end of the day, we won the day, but also it is going to be something I think that we're going to have to deal with in the upcoming weeks and maybe even in the years about being reintroduced. And so while we can be really proud of our efforts, it's something that we definitely need to keep an eye on because we want to stay a best in practice when it comes to this specific piece of how our business community works. And we couldn't be more thankful to our partners in order to make sure that people truly understood what they were voting on. So, Jacob, we obviously are going to have another upcoming week where the legislature is in on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Both the House and the Senate are scheduled to be in. Additionally, the Senate has a calendar day on Monday, December 23rd. And so, to your point, there is a process where bills have to lie over for 5 days. There are numerous things that are over in the Senate that will be coming our way. But, Sarah, before we dive into that, we do have a special opportunity on Wednesday with Brian. And so, could you maybe share some details on what we'll be doing on Wednesday morning?
Yes, thanks, Kelly. So today's actually the last regular small business briefing of the calendar year. Kind of crazy to think that we're already coming to a close of 2024. But Brian wanted to make sure he had a chance to really dive into some of these issues with you all. And so he will be hosting, along with Kelly, a briefing this Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. So we'd hope you can join us. As always, it will be recorded and available on our website, but definitely would love to have your participation. I'm going to be sharing the registration link here in the chat on Zoom and then on Facebook. So again, please join us Wednesday, 10 a.m. It will be featuring Brian and Kelly. And I think Jacob, you and Kelly are going to kind of continue the conversation about what to expect yet this week.
Yeah, and I'm going to be kicking it straight over to Kelly. Uh, as we've talked about, we're going to be spending a lot of additional time in Lansing this week. Uh, we have gotten some hints about what this next week holds, but what do we know for sure?
Sure. So, like I said, we know the calendar. One thing I did not address earlier in this program was um, Republicans in the House did walk out last week. They left the floor, and House Democrats continued on Friday with their respective agenda. And so the dynamics we're dealing with this week are, will the Republicans in the House return to the floor to vote or not? There was a lot of chatter over the weekend about Speaker Tate's leadership amongst his caucus, and are some of them willing to come back and vote as well? The Senate is I should say the Senate Democrats are chomping at the bit to have them return. They sent over a lot of legislation, a lot of things that we are worried about that would impact the small business community, waiting to be voted on by the House. And so the question really is, who's going to show up for work this week? And I don't say that to be rude by any means, but there is a lot of back and forth within their respective caucuses, within the respective chambers, and then between the chambers. And we also do not know what discussions are happening with the governor's team, if at all, after, like I said, the wheels kind of fell off the bus last week. So please stay tuned to our website, to our social media channels. If session does move forward, we will undoubtedly have some calls to action that we will need your help on. Cannot stress enough that the ones that we did last week that you responded to made a difference, and we're going to need you again if things move forward. So let's just hit on a few other things that came about over the weekend. And I think before I do that, Jacob, I'm just going to say thank you so much for joining us today. You are a huge asset to the SBAM team, logging all those bill numbers. But thank you for being with us today, and I'll let you give your final remarks before Sarah and I kind of close out the show.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me on today. This was a very busy week, but I know that you and I are always happy to be over at the Capitol and making sure that we're doing right by our members and making sure that the legislators know what the things they're voting on and the sort of impacts they're going to have on the small businesses in their community. So appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. So Sarah, I'm just going
Oh,
to touch on one thing and then we'll
okay.
close out the show. Want to address that last time I was on, we were talking about Mayor Duggan announcing his bid for governor as an independent. There's been some news over the weekend in the respective Republican Party, the MIGOP, and then also in the Michigan Democratic Party. As we know, Pete Hoekstra, who is the current chair of the Michigan Republican Party, has been chosen by President-elect Trump to serve as the ambassador to Canada. And so he will be not obviously returning as a chair. And there's been now a decision by a couple folks to run for that respective chair position. One being Senator Jim Runstead from Oakland County, and then also Michonne Maddock, who's married to State Representative Matt Maddock in Oakland County as well, has decided to run for that seat as well. She's been in the news, a little bit controversial, but these are pretty dyed in the wool Trump Republicans, if you will. As we know, the Republican Party had a lot of drama within it when Christina Karamo was leading it, and Pete Hoekstra stepped in. Very loyal to President-elect Trump, but also has a history of being an establishment Republican. And so now we're seeing maybe a little bit of a pivot back to, those dyed-in-the-wool, very early Trump Republicans, if you will. And will there be other people that start to join in the race that might be more of like a Pete Hoekstra-like candidate? And what does that mean? Because we know that precinct delegates choose in their respective parties who they want to lead their party, and the precinct delegate base, I think, is probably a little bit challenged with all different kinds of Republicans, and so who do they want to lead them into a very important 2026 election? Similar in the Democratic Party, there was an announcement today by Curtis Hertel. Curtis Hertel was running for that open congressional seat that is currently held by Alyssa Slotkin, was defeated by Tom Barrett, and he will be running for the Democrat Party chair now. And so I'll say Democrats are usually pretty good about coalescing around someone. Curtis Hertel is very well respected in the Democratic Party. He tends to be a fundraising animal. He's also very politically inclined. Even though he lost his election, this is kind of his wheelhouse. He's pretty good at this, and so we are starting to see kind of that party leadership fall into place and where people want to be. And so as we gear up for 2026, we're seeing that start to fall into place. I'm sure we're going to see more people jump in the race, and we'll see what comes from that. But Sarah, as you said, this is the end of our shows for 2024. You have been our anchor, our core, keep us on tracker, if you will, for the small business briefing. And it would not be appropriate if anyone else but you would lead us out of 2024.
Well, thanks, Kelly. I do want to say, you were giving Jacob some thanks, and you both deserve a lot of thanks from our team and from the whole small business community for the work that you've done this whole legislative session, but in particular last week. I know there were a lot of literally sleepless nights. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Jacob. Be sure to tune in for the special briefing on Wednesday. If you're in the Ann Arbor area, we'd love to see you at our owner to owner event this Thursday evening. And just thank you for spending time with us every Monday. We do work hard to bring you the latest news and updates and find ways to connect. So we appreciate your support and your viewership. And we hope you have a wonderful holiday season. We will be back in January on Mondays at 3 p.m. So thanks, everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone.